I'm not going to show you guys the picture of Sinwar's skull caved in, but I mean, that's like the picture that's going around. The way that they found Sinwar's body is kind of crazy. So apparently, I think it was the Israeli 828, or it was 100. I believe it was 828. Somebody will correct me. Some military nerd in chat. And it wasn't any like an Israeli special operations forces, like some super special unit. It was a training like battalion. It was soldiers that helped train the other soldiers how to fight. So those soldiers go out, they start, fighting in Gaza, and then in the south, they end up stumbling upon 3 militants in the building. They fire a tank shell into the building, and then kill the militants. The next day, a drone is circling around, and they spot something, and somebody sees something that they think is suspicious. Just like, I don't know what this is. And they go check it out, and they find out that it's Sinwar. It looked suspiciously like Sinwar. They're like, oh my gosh, is this Sinwar? They then collect the body. The rumors start spreading. They send it back to Israel. They then compare Sinwar with his DNA data and his dental records. And now, if you're curious as to how Israel got his DNA data, because I saw like one person, and this isn't like a big thing, but I saw one person like, it's kind of suspicious that Israel says they have the DNA data. Why would they have the DNA data? Well, the reason they have the DNA data is because Sinwar was in an Israeli prison for like 2 decades. And like when he would come into the prison, he'd like interrogate the new prisoners. He would organize resistance in the prison system to try to, change conditions and how they're being treated and stuff like he was very active in the Israeli prison system. And if you're in the Israeli prison, they're going to have your, fingerprints. They're going to have your DNA. They're going to have your blood type. They're going to have all that information. So it makes sense that they would have it for Sinwar. Sinwar was traded back into Gaza in a hostage deal back in 2013. And it was from that influence that he built from within the prison system in this Israeli prison that he was able to then climb the ranks again to then eventually become, once the previous leader got blown up, the leader of Hamas during this war. He's always been much more of a hardliner. He's always been somebody who's not really been... hardliner versus non-hardliner in Hamas, of course, they're all not necessarily moderate people, but relative to the Hamas organization, he was considered a hardliner. He dealt with the organization's internal security. He was called, due to his strict hardline position and his brutality, the Butcher of Han Yunis. And he would try to weed out, both in the Israeli prison system, when he's talking about Israeli spies that were posing as prisoners within the prison system, or informants that had agreed to become informants for the Israelis for rewards. He would root them out in prison, and then he would come back and he'd root them out in Hamas, trying to find Israeli spies in the ranks of the organization in Gaza. And of course, when they find them, you can expect, Butcher of Han Yunis. He's not the nicest guy around. Spies. Point is, he was managing the internal security of the organization. Now, once the war started and it was well underway, and the political leader of Hamas and the high commanders of Hamas and everybody else got killed, I'm sure somebody could post a list of it somewhere, but I don't think it's worth it. Eventually, he got moved up to the leadership of Hamas. Now, what people like the top leadership of Hamas as an organization. Now, people knew that he was very serious about security, just due to his background in the Israeli prison system and the fact that he hadn't had many public meetings with journalists. I think he had 2 meetings with journalists in public, both during periods of conflict with Israel. And they were both for 2 hours. So he's not somebody who's constantly in the media spotlight. Once he went on the streets of Gaza to try to make a point against the Israelis, but he is somebody who takes security very seriously. He was sending messages outside of Gaza this is what was believed from within the Gazan tunnels. He would write them messages on paper, and he would send it out, these paper messages, to try to throw out commands and send messages to the public. So he wasn't using a lot of electronic communication, which of course could be hacked and then tracked back to him. And after what we saw happen with Hezbollah and their pagers, that electronics can be very basic when it comes to killing you. Then again, the CIA tried to kill Castro with like an explosive pen or something, so you never know really what'll get you. Anyway, read Adrian Konecki's Battleground Ukraine. I haven't read it, but if you want to email me about it, you can. Maybe I'll take a look at it. Anyway, it was believed that Sinwar was hiding in this tunnel system surrounded by the 101 hostages. Now, that's how many hostages that are supposedly still in Gaza. It is believed that a significant amount of them, the estimate I see is like a third, but you don't know because they're not going to say openly. He was surrounded by the hostages in Gaza, in the tunnels, like as a type of human shield, so that if they bombed it, Netanyahu would end up killing all the hostages, or if they sent soldiers in there, if they started firing, they would end up, hitting the hostages. That was the idea. But that's not where they found Sinwar. Again, they found Sinwar above on the surface in buildings. They then fired at Sinwar with a tank, not knowing he was Sinwar. It was a training unit that ended up engaging him. He was with 2 other militants. They then find his body the next day because, again, they didn't know he was Sinwar. And he's just in like some green fatigues. And now we're finding footage that is supposedly said to be Sinwar. Now, this is the message on it. And I just wanted to show this to be like the different perspective that some people might have on this. This is just the first one I found on Twitter, but then I read it and it was like, he certainly has an image of Sinwar. Israel made the mistake of publishing footage of Sinwar's last moments. Wearing a kippa, I believe that's how it's pronounced. Sorry, I'm not good with pronunciation, and this is not my focus. And severely injured, he threw a stick at the drone operator filming him, a final act of defiance against the Zionist occupation. In his death, he became a legend. So here is the video that he just described as legendary. So this is a building that he is hiding in with his crew. And then the Israeli drone comes close and you can spot this man sitting in a chair. And that right there is Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, hiding in this building. It's kind of wild to watch this footage. As you get closer, yep, thank you for making the obvious, but the guy that picks up like what looks like a stick, we don't know if that's a stick or a sword or whatever it is, and then he eventually throws it at the drone, trying to knock it down as it's filming him. You can see also, before he throws it, his face is covered, so he only has his eye showing, and I assume the reason that is because he doesn't want his face to be spotted by any Israeli cameras or anybody, because even if an Israeli soldier sees him, then obviously he's done for. If an Israeli drone sees him and they can spot his face, or some Israeli intelligence, then he's done for. If a Palestinian sees him, or even somebody on his own side, you would think that's necessarily, not necessarily bad, and maybe it isn't, but he knows from his time in the Israeli prison system and from being in charge of Hamas's internal security that there are spies everywhere. And one spy immediately sees him, sends a message up to Israel, gets paid $50,000, and boom, Sinwar is dead. I mean, how do you think they found out about Nasrallah's location? How do you think they found out about all these other Hezbollah leaders' locations, about these other Hamas leaders' locations, about the guy in Iran that they killed, the political leader in Iran, the deputy political leader in Beirut? I think while I cannot pledge for any of them because I'm not in the know, but I would not be surprised if a decent amount of those were informants, which was, of course, Sinwar's eternal enemy. You could see him loading up, and there he throws the stick. Misses, though. So yes, that is the last living footage of Sinwar. I cannot show you the picture of Sinwar. He is laying down in rubble, his head caved in. He was able to stop the brain tumor, but it seems like the IDF brought damage back to his brain, so it seems like his head injuries have been following him his whole life and onto the grave as well. I don't really have much to say about this outside of this is the guy that supposedly, is to be believed, organized the October 7th attack and helped make the decision to take hostages from lower Israel and bring them back into Gaza, which was obviously a fateful decision. And now we're living in the reality of the fallout of the decision to both do the October 7th attack, kill all of those civilians, as they did. It wasn't just civilians, but a lot of civilians as well. And then take hostages, bringing them back into Gaza. He was the one who was the hardliner within Hamas, who was pushing for more aggressive action against Israel. And it is to be believed that part of the goal here in taking all these hostages is that he would take these hostages and then trade them for other Hamas fighters, other Hamas leaders that are currently in the Israeli prison system. And now, there was some trades that were done, and I believe the trade was the Israelis would get 10 hostages for 30 exchanged hostages, not hostages, but prisoners, but whatever word you want to use, from the Israeli side. Many of them women and children, even though some of the children had engaged in like terrorism and stuff like that. They were exchanged for a short period, for a short ceasefire. But after that one exchange, even though there was a lot of talk of it, those big exchanges for the big Hamas leaders, those big exchanges for all of his like top Hamas buddies, that never came to be. And so now one of the main movers of this operation in the first place, who got this whole wave of violence started, is now dead. And that exchange deal never happened. He was not able to exchange for those prisoners. He's dead. Their top commanders, many of them dead. Top political leaders, dead. All the faces of Hamas, wiped out. That's not to say that all of Hamas's leadership is gone. He will be replaced. Others will be replaced. But they keep going lower and lower and lower. And these type of leadership destruction, even if they eventually can find another leader, these are moments of chaos. These are moments where you've cut the head off the organization, and the organization is trying to scramble as it's bleeding out, looking for another head, looking to sew something on to keep it moving. And this is while Israel has been putting pressure on Hamas for well over a year. And so I've seen from both Harris and some others that there is some hope that this will be a moment for where the Israelis can take a step back and say, look, we've just busted up Gaza for well over a year. We've killed basically the entirety, if not the vast majority of the most influential Hamas leaders there are, including the organizers and many of the perpetrators of the attacks. Now the main goal should be the retrieval of the remaining hostages through some sort of ceasefire deal. That seems to be the hope from Harris, from a statement that she has released in the immediate aftermath of the knowledge of this. I saw Biden released a statement, and most of it was like generally celebratory that Sinwar was dead, while also saying that they need to now move on to the exchange of hostages. Now, I think the odds of this leading to an immediate end of the war is basically nil. It could maybe lead, if we're being very hopeful, to Hamas feeling like it's in such a weak position that for a ceasefire of some sort, which would be much more in Israel's terms, they would concede, because I don't know where they go from here. But I think there's also a high likelihood that either for domestic political concerns on Netanyahu's front, because he might still want to drag this out a little bit longer, because he still has an October 7th reckoning coming for him when the war is over. But that's, of course, pure speculation. That's something that could affect it, maybe. There is, of course, the continued operations in southern Lebanon, which are continuing to press on as Hezbollah is targeted. Nasrallah is now dead, but that doesn't mean the bombing has stopped. They're continuing to ramp up the bombing campaign, with some of these bombs now falling in historically Christian communities after some Hezbollah fighters are believed to have fled into them, causing more strife amongst the civilian population. And so I don't have a lot of high hopes for immediate end to the war. I also am very cynical about possibly Netanyahu waiting for the end of the election to maybe think he could get better terms with a different president on extending aid and extending support. But I don't know for sure. Let's check out two statements from Netanyahu. And I said two because he put out two statements. And the reason I'm doing this is after covering the war in Ukraine for a while, I do know that wartime leaders tend to release different messages for the international community than for the domestic community. And so we have a 2-minute message from Netanyahu in English, and then we have a 4-minute message from Netanyahu in his native language, And so let's check it out, because I think we might get a little bit of a tone shift.
1 year ago, Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist chief of Hamas, launched the October 7th massacre against Israel. It was the bloodiest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It was the worst attack on the Jewish state since the founding of Israel. Sinwar's terrorists murdered in cold blood 1,200 people. That's elderly people, Holocaust survivors, children. They brutally raped women. They beheaded men. They burnt babies alive. And they took some 250 men, 251 women, men, and children hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. Today, the mastermind of this day of sheer evil is no more. Yahya Sinwar is dead. He was killed in Rafah by the brave soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces. While this is not the end of the war in Gaza, it's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages. Hamas is holding 101 hostages in Gaza who are citizens of 23 countries, citizens of Israel, but citizens of many other countries. Israel is committed to doing everything in our power to bring all of them home. And Israel will guarantee the safety of all those who return our hostages. But to those who would harm our hostages, I have another message. Israel will hunt you down and bring you to justice. I also have a message of hope to the peoples of the region. The axis of terror that was built by Iran is collapsing before our eyes. Nasrallah is gone. His deputy Muhsin is gone. Haniyeh is gone. Def is gone. Sinwar is gone. The reign of terror that the Iranian regime has imposed on its own people and on the peoples of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, this too will come to an end. All those who seek a future of prosperity and peace in the Middle East should unite to build a better future. Together, we can push back the forces of darkness and create a future of light and hope for all of us.
Okay, a little like Star Wars at the end there, the light and the hope and the, you know, the flavor and the color. But yeah, it seems to be a focus on getting the hostages back and, you know, bringing an end to evil, etc., focusing on the more, obviously the much more sympathetic parts of Israel's story of this war, which is getting back, and the obviously more sympathetic, getting back the hostages. Now, this was what the message he put out for his international audience. I don't want to say much yet because we have 4 more minutes for his domestic speech, because he made, again, 2 separate speeches, one for his domestic audience in Hebrew, one, and I said native language earlier. I meant Hebrew, of course. I saw people in chat saying, you don't know Hebrew. In Hebrew versus the one he said in English, which was for, of course, everybody outside of Israel. Let's listen to what he wanted to say to the Israeli people following the strike. Following the tank shell, I guess. I'm just so used to airstrikes being the way it happens.
Citizens of Israel, a year ago we celebrated Sukkot. At the exact time, Yahya Sinwar was making final preparations for the October 7th massacre. I stand before you today to inform you that Yahya Sinwar has been eliminated. The person who committed the most terrible massacre in the history of our nation since the Holocaust, the mass murderer who murdered thousands of Israelis and kidnapped hundreds of our citizens, was eliminated today by our heroic soldiers. And today, as we promised to do, we came to account with him. Today, evil has suffered a heavy blow, but the task before us is not yet complete. To the dear families of the hostages, I say, this is an important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until the return home of all of your loved ones, who are our loved ones. This is our highest commitment. This is my highest commitment. And to the resident of Gaza, I say, Sinwar ruined your life. He told you he was a lion, but in reality, he was hiding on a dark den, and he was killed when he fled in a panic from our soldiers. His elimination is an important landmark in the decline of the evil rule of Hamas. I would like to say again, in the clearest way, Hamas will no longer rule Gaza. This is the beginning of the day after Hamas. And this is an opportunity for you, the resident of Gaza, to finally break free from its tyranny. I call on everyone who hold our hostages. I call on whoever lays down his weapon and return our hostages, we will allow him to go out and leave. And in the same way I say, whoever harm our hostages, blood on his head, we will reckon with him. The return of our hostages is an opportunity to achieve all our goals, and it brings the end of the war closer. To the people of the regions, I say, in Gaza, in Beirut, throughout the entire region, the darkness recedes and the light rises. Def, Hania, Sinwar, Nasrallah, Mohsen, Akil, and many of their associates are gone. I'm calling you, people of the region. We have a great opportunity to stop the axis of evil and create a different future, a future of peace, a future of prosperity in the entire region. Together, we can repel the curse and promote the blessing. Now it is clear to everyone, in Israel and in the world, why we insisted on not ending the war, why we did insist, in the face of all the pressures, to enter Rafah, the fortified stronghold of Hamas where Sinwar and many of the murderers hid. I would like to express my deep appreciation to the IDF and Shin Bet fighters and their commanders for their determined and courageous action. There are none better than them. Today we clarified again what happened to those who hurt us. Today we once again showed the world the victory of good over evil. But the war, my dears, is not over yet. And it is difficult. And it exacts heavy prices from us. I wish to express my condolences from the bottom of my heart to the families who lost their loved ones. I want to hug the families of our fallen heroes. Their supreme sacrifice, including the last few days, brings us closer to victory. As King David said, I will pursue my enemies and destroy them, and I will not return to their end.
He said until they're dead is the translation. He said until their end, but I believe the translation is until they're dead.
Citizens of Israel, we are in the resurrection war. Big challenges are still ahead of us.
War.
We are required for long patience, for the unity of the ranks, for courage, for a firm stand. Together we will fight, and with God's help, together we will win.
Okay. And that's that. Thank you, Bobby Duke, for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. I just saw that in Gutter Chat. I appreciate that, buddy. Thank you. This was interesting from Gantz. 1 second. Benny Gantz. Oh, I thought I said somebody earlier. I thought it said Matt Gates. Check out the Matt Gates tweet on Sinwar. I was like, what would Matt Gates know about Sinwar? The elimination today of arch-terrorist Sinwar isn't only a matter of justice. It sends a very clear message to our enemies. Israel will not rest until those who harm us will pay for their crimes. The IDF will have to continue operating in Gaza for years, but this moment must be seized and leveraged to bring the hostages home and topple the Hamas regime. Thanks to the IDF, the world is now a safer, better place with Sinwar no longer in it. Okay. So I think this, even though this is Benny Gantz, and this is not Netanyahu, this could give some perspective of what the next steps are for Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF in Israel. So they just destroyed basically the entirety of the political leadership of Hamas. They cut the head off the snake, and now they're going to be scrambling to get new leadership. If the pathway forward is not to negotiate with Hamas and to get the rest of the hostages out, with Hamas still in power, and they're proposing something like this, then this leaves like one of two options. The first option is Hamas being in such a terrible shape that they would be willing to let go of power in the Gaza Strip to preserve their lives and maybe evacuation from Gaza. And maybe, the Israel could justify their evacuation from Gaza and like saying, oh, well, we killed the people who organized it like Sinwar or otherwise in exchange for the hostages, basically trading the lives of the remaining Hamas members and fighters for the hostages, or just eliminating what is left of Hamas, like building by building, room by room, as there are still some new members that are coming to the organization, but morale is largely caved in, and I'm sure this is not helping. So after that, whatever pathway is chosen, the one where Hamas leaves and they trade the hostages for their safety, or they go forward and they fight for the hostages, Israel does, which probably has a much higher likelihood of leading to more of the hostages being dead. We don't know how many of the hostages remaining are still alive, of the 101 hostages remaining. But if you're going in the, going into the tunnels to try to find them, a lot of these tunnels unexplored by Israel before, where there's going to be people hiding in little holes. You don't know what's going to be around the next corner. They could have some of these hostages rigged with, not specifically tied with explosives, but groups of them rigged with explosives, or have guards near them that'll shoot them if anything happens, or use them as human shields as Israeli soldiers come down. They want to stop Israel from getting those hostages. And so if they come in and try to get those hostages, not only is there the risk of Hamas killing them, but as they're running through the rest of these tunnels and they don't know where the hostages are, they're trying to root out the rest of Hamas, they could end up blowing up tunnels where there are hostages and they didn't know it. There have been hostages that have been misidentified as, people raising their hands, maybe could have been Israeli civilians or Hamas fighters surrendering, that were then shot by IDF soldiers. And they thought that they were, not hostages, but they were hostages. And so stuff like that happening, if they pursue the latter option, again and again and again, it's not impossible. And in fact, I would even say it's quite likely. And so what pathway they choose, if this is the way they want to go forward with it, and can I just say, it might not really be up to them to choose if they are pushing forward on this pathway. Because if they're pushing forward on this pathway, there could be a chance that the former option of negotiating with what's left of Hamas might not be an option. They might just keep fighting. Because if they might keep fighting, saying, we will give you the hostages if you leave Gaza. Something along those lines. And if Benny Gantz and Netanyahu is committed to staying in Gaza for a long military occupation, then they might be completely unsatisfactory to them. And so the only option forward, if that is not accepted by Hamas, which I think is a likely scenario, would mean fighting in these tunnels, fighting through these ruins of buildings with the remaining Hamas fighters, trying to find all the hostages one by one. And if you're the family of the hostages, that's probably a very concerning pathway to get your boys home, or to get your girls home, or to get whoever your family members are home. But that might very well be the one that the Israeli government chooses. Because if their goal is to stop any reformation of Hamas in Gaza, or something like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad taking over once a power vacuum has been formed, they are very much of the belief, it seems, that they need to be there to stop it. While Israelis, in large part, don't seem to be excited about an extended military occupation of Gaza with their troops, if that's what the Israeli government chooses to do, that's what the Israeli government chooses to do. And if they want to stop any of these groups from filling that power vacuum, something has to fill it. And I don't know if the Israeli government is going to accept anything but military occupation for the near term. Now, whether this comes with like reintroduction of settlements into the Gaza Strip or not, I do not know. But obviously with Ben Gvir in tow, I wouldn't put anything off.